Before tomatoes became the taste of pizza, pasta, and ketchup, they were food for people who had almost nothing. In the crowded streets of southern Italy, a little tomato could turn dry bread, cheap pasta, or a bowl of vegetables into something worth eating. What the wealthy once feared, the poor transformed into comfort, identity, and survival. Then factories discovered that the same fruit could be canned, concentrated, branded, and sold across the world. The tomato escaped poverty, but many of the people harvesting it never did. Long before the tomato reached Europe, its story had already begun along the western edge of South America, where wild relatives produced tiny fruits no larger than berries. These early tomatoes were nothing like the smooth red varieties seen in supermarkets today. They were smaller, more acidic, highly variable, and built for survival rather than appearance. Over many generations, indigenous farmers carried certain plants northward, selected the fruits they preferred, and gradually changed the crop through cultivation. Larger tomatoes emerged, with more flesh and less of the wild plant's original toughness. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, tomatoes were already part of established food systems, shaped by centuries of human knowledge. They grew beside maize, beans, chilies, and other crops that sustained communities across the region. Europe would later claim the tomato as a discovery, but it was not discovered. It had already been understood, cultivated, and transformed long before Europeans learned its name. When Spanish ships carried tomatoes across the Atlantic in the 16th century, the fruit traveled inside a much larger system of conquest. The same routes that moved silver, sugar, maize, potatoes, and human beings also carried seeds between continents, permanently changing what people ate and how empires made money. For Europeans, the tomato was one more unfamiliar plant gathered from lands they were trying to control. For the indigenous societies of the Americas, however, its departure came during an age of invasion, forced labor, disease, and political collapse. The fruit's global journey cannot be separated from that violence. It did not spread because the world peacefully discovered a new flavor. It spread because ships, colonies, and commercial networks connected distant regions under unequal power. Yet even after reaching Europe, the tomato did not immediately become food. It entered botanical gardens and wealthy estates as an exotic curiosity, admired for its unusual shape and color, but approached with suspicion whenever anyone considered placing it on a plate. Europe's suspicion was not entirely irrational. The tomato belonged to the nightshade family, which included plants already associated with poison, medicine, and danger. Its leaves and stems were toxic, while its bright fruit looked unfamiliar to people who relied on older medical theories to judge what food could safely enter the body. Wealthy Europeans sometimes displayed tomatoes as ornamental plants rather than eating them, and stories gradually spread that the fruit itself could cause illness or death. Later accounts often blamed pewter plates containing lead, suggesting that acidic tomatoes drew poison from the metal. But this explanation is difficult to prove and was probably not the only reason for their reputation. Fear grew from several sources at once: botanical confusion, class prejudice, medical superstition, and simple unfamiliarity. For generations, the tomato remained trapped between attraction and disgust, admired for its beauty, but distrusted as food. Its transformation would not begin in royal dining rooms, but in kitchens where people had fewer choices. In southern Italy, especially around Naples, the tomato found the conditions that fear could not defeat. The climate suited the plant, the soil was productive, and the crowded city contained thousands of people who needed food that was cheap, filling, and easy to prepare. Meat remained beyond the reach of many families, while bread, pasta, vegetables, and oil formed the foundation of daily survival. Tomato added acidity, moisture, color, and intensity to ingredients that might otherwise have tasted plain. It could be cooked into a sauce, crushed over bread, or combined with whatever was available. Slowly, the fruit moved from gardens into street kitchens and working-class homes. What aristocrats had treated as suspicious decoration became useful because poorer people could not afford to reject nourishment simply because it lacked prestige. The tomato's first great victory in Europe was therefore not a royal endorsement. It was the decision of ordinary people to make something valuable from a fruit others had ignored. As Naples expanded, tomato became more than a useful ingredient. It became part of the city's identity. Street vendors served inexpensive food to workers, sailors, and families living in cramped neighborhoods where full kitchens were often a luxury. Flatbreads topped with tomato, oil, garlic, or small amounts of cheese could be prepared quickly and eaten without plates or cutlery. Pasta dressed with tomato sauce offered the same advantage. Simple ingredients could feed many people while delivering warmth, color, and satisfaction. These dishes were not created from abundance. They emerged from necessity, shaped by crowded streets, low wages, and the need to make limited food stretch further. Over time, recipes born in poor neighborhoods were adopted by wider society and eventually celebrated as symbols of Italian culture. The transformation concealed an important truth. Before tomato became associated with romance, tradition, and national pride, it had first earned its place by helping people survive. The tomato's greatest weakness was also the barrier preventing it from traveling farther. Once ripe, it softened quickly, bruised easily, and began to decay within days. That began to change in 1856, when 20-year-old Francesco Cirio opened a preserving business in Turin and began using appertization, a method based on heating food inside sealed containers. His company later expanded into tomato products and built processing operations in southern Italy. In 1867, Cirio displayed his preserved products at the Paris Exposition, showing that Italian food could be processed, branded, and exported internationally. For tomato growers, this created an entirely new market. Fruit that could not survive a long journey in fresh form could be crushed, cooked, and preserved near the fields, then shipped to cities far beyond the harvest region. In Italy, especially around Parma and Naples, factories turned seasonal crops into sauce, peeled tomatoes, and concentrated paste. Summer no longer had to end when the fields stopped producing. Its flavor could be sealed inside metal and opened in winter, carried aboard ships, or sold to families who lived hundreds of miles from the farm. The tomato was becoming something more powerful than a local ingredient, a durable industrial commodity. Canning changed more than the tomato's shelf life. It changed who could depend on it. Growing cities needed food that could be stored, transported, and prepared without access to fresh fields, while armies and merchant ships required provisions capable of surviving long journeys. Tomatoes fit this new world unusually well. Their acidity helped preservation, their color made meals look richer, and their concentrated flavor could improve cheap grains, beans, and meat. Factories grew beside railways and ports, drawing harvests from surrounding farms and turning them into standardized products for distant consumers. The relationship between farmer and eater became less visible. People no longer needed to know when tomatoes were in season, where they had grown, or whose hands had picked them. They only needed to open a container. Preservation had solved the fruit's biological weakness, but it also separated tomatoes from the land and labor that produced them, making industrial expansion easier to admire and its hidden costs easier to ignore. Once tomatoes could be preserved, entrepreneurs began turning them into products that required almost no knowledge of the original fruit. In 1876, Henry J. Heinz placed tomato ketchup on American shelves. Campbell introduced its beefsteak tomato soup in 1895, and 2 years later, chemist John T. Dorrance developed condensed soup by removing much of its water, making each can cheaper to package, transport, and store. The tomato's natural balance of acidity, sweetness, color, and savory depth made cheap ingredients seem richer and more satisfying. A small amount of concentrated tomato could give identity to beans, meat, pasta, rice, or factory-made dough. This made it especially valuable to the emerging processed food industry, which needed ingredients that were affordable, recognizable, and easy to reproduce at scale. Advertising completed the transformation by selling tomato products as convenient, wholesome, and modern. The fruit that had once helped poor families improve simple meals now helped corporations build global brands. Tomato was no longer only something people ate. It had become a commercial language understood in kitchens across the world. By the middle of the 20th century, California had become one of the most important centers of tomato production in the world. But the system depended on thousands of seasonal workers bending through the fields and picking fruit by hand. Growers faced rising labor costs, tighter harvest schedules, and increasing uncertainty over whether enough workers would arrive before the crop spoiled. Tomatoes did not wait for economic negotiations or political decisions. Once ripe, they had to be collected quickly, and a delayed harvest could destroy an entire season's profit. Engineers began searching for a machine that could perform the work faster, but the ordinary tomato was too delicate. Early harvesters shook plants so violently that ripe fruit split open, softened, or disappeared beneath the machinery. The industry had reached a strange turning point. To preserve large-scale production, it would not be enough to invent a better machine. Scientists would also have to create a different kind of tomato. At the University of California, Davis, plant breeder Gordy Jack Hanna and agricultural engineer Kobe Lorenzen began working together in 1949. Hanna selected tomatoes that ripened uniformly and remained firm under pressure, while Lorenzen developed a machine capable of cutting the vines, shaking the fruit loose, and moving it across sorting belts. After years of failed trials, Blackwelder Manufacturing commercialized the design in 1959. The new varieties ripened more uniformly, remained firmer under pressure, and detached more easily from their stems. Hanna's blockier fruit became known as the square tomato because it was less likely to roll from the conveyor. These traits were valuable, not because they improved the experience of eating a fresh tomato, but because they reduced damage, labor, and delay. By the 1960s, mechanical harvesting was beginning to transform California's processing industry. A biological fruit had been redesigned around the movements of steel. The machine no longer needed to adapt completely to the tomato. The tomato had been trained to endure the machine. Mechanical harvesting made tomato production faster and cheaper, but efficiency did not benefit every grower equally. The new machines were expensive, required large fields, and worked best when planting, irrigation, and ripening followed a tightly controlled schedule. Large operations could absorb those costs and process enormous harvests in a short period. Smaller farms often could not. As machines spread, the number of growers declined while the average farm became larger and more specialized. The transition happened with extraordinary speed. Acreage planted for mechanical harvesting rose from roughly 7% to 85% in only 3 years. Thousands of field jobs also disappeared, removing brutal manual labor, but leaving many seasonal workers without an easy replacement for their income. The controversy eventually reached the courts. In 1979, the California Agrarian Action Project sued the University of California, arguing that publicly funded research had favored large agricultural operations over family farms. The group ultimately lost on appeal, but the decade-long dispute helped force a national debate over who benefited from agricultural technology and contributed to UC creating a center focused on smaller farmers. Yet the machine did not eliminate the human cost of tomato production. It transformed only the part of the industry that could tolerate bruising, crushing, and immediate processing. Tomatoes sold fresh in supermarkets still had to arrive smooth, firm, and visually perfect, which meant many were picked by hand. Across the United States and Southern Europe, this work increasingly depended on migrant laborers who moved from region to region following the harvest. They bent beneath intense heat, carried heavy containers, and were often paid according to how much they collected, rather than how many hours they worked. That system rewarded speed while making rest, injury, and exhaustion financially dangerous. Many workers also depended on employers or labor contractors for transportation, housing, and continued access to work. The tomato had escaped the limits of season and distance, but the people harvesting it remained trapped inside a system built on urgency, low prices, and replaceable labor. In the worst cases, that dependence became a weapon. During the 1990s and 2000s, farm workers around Immokalee, Florida, helped expose crews controlled through debt, threats, withheld wages, and violence. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers later reported that its investigations and cooperation with law enforcement helped free more than 1,500 people from forced labor operations across the southeastern United States. In southern Italy, illegal recruiters used similar vulnerability within the system known as caporalato. Supermarkets demanded flawless tomatoes at low prices. Distributors passed those demands to growers. Growers pushed costs onto labor contractors, and the pressure eventually reached the person filling a bucket beneath the sun. By the time the fruit appeared under bright store lights, the bruises had been removed, the dirt had been washed away, and the worker had disappeared from view. Cheap tomatoes seemed like proof of an efficient food system. In reality, part of the cost had simply been transferred to people with the least power to refuse it. Resistance became organized in Immokalee, where former tomato pickers and organizers such as Lucas Benitez helped build the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. In 2001, the coalition launched its campaign for fair food and began a national boycott of Taco Bell. After 4 years of marches, student organizing, and consumer pressure, Taco Bell signed an agreement in March 2005 to support a penny-per-pound premium and stronger standards in its Florida tomato supply chain. Their strategy recognized that exploitation was not created by one abusive supervisor alone. It was sustained by an entire supply chain that rewarded low prices while avoiding responsibility for how those prices were achieved. In 2011, that campaign evolved into the Fair Food Program, which introduced stronger monitoring, worker education, complaint systems, and agreements requiring participating buyers to support better conditions. These reforms did not erase exploitation, and enforcement remained uneven, but they proved that the tomato industry could operate differently. The people who harvested the fruit were not merely victims of the system, they were beginning to reshape it. By the 21st century, the global trade in concentrated tomato paste had pushed Serio's model of preserved, branded tomato products to a far greater scale. Unlike fresh tomatoes, paste could be packed into enormous barrels, shipped cheaply across oceans, and transformed again far from the fields where the fruit had grown. A company could import concentrated tomato, dilute it, season it, place it inside a brightly designed package, and sell it beneath images of traditional farms or Mediterranean kitchens. The label created a sense of place even when the supply chain stretched across several countries. This flexibility made tomato paste extremely valuable, but it also intensified competition among growers and processors. Producers capable of delivering huge volumes at the lowest price gained access to distant markets, while smaller farms struggled to survive. The tomato had become truly global, yet globalization made its origins increasingly difficult to see. Consumers recognized the brand on the container, not the field, factory, or worker behind it. The same pressure for uniformity that shaped global trade also reshaped the fresh tomato itself. Supermarkets wanted fruit that could be packed tightly, transported over long distances, stored for days, and still appear smooth beneath bright lights. Growers therefore favored varieties that ripened evenly, resisted cracking, and remained firm after harvest. These qualities reduced waste and made supply more predictable, but flavor was harder to protect because it could not be judged from appearance alone. A tomato's taste depends on a delicate balance of sugars, acids, and aromatic compounds, many of which were never the main target of industrial breeding. The result was a fruit that looked perfect, traveled well, and disappointed the moment it was cut open. This was not simply a failure of nature. It was the logical outcome of a system that rewarded what could be measured, shipped, and displayed, while treating flavor as a secondary concern. Behind that loss of flavor was an even deeper transformation. For most of tomato history, farmers maintained countless local varieties adapted to different soils, climates, colors, shapes, and culinary traditions. Some were sweet, others intensely acidic. Some ripened early, while others survived heat, drought, or disease. Industrial agriculture did not need all that diversity. It needed a smaller number of dependable varieties that could mature on schedule, withstand transport, and deliver consistent yields across vast fields. As those commercial lines spread, many traditional tomatoes disappeared from regular production or survived only in seed collections and small farms. Uniformity made planting easier, but it also narrowed the crop's genetic memory. That danger became more serious as tomato production expanded into hotter, drier, and more intensively cultivated regions. High temperatures can interfere with flowering and fruit development, while drought increases competition for water between farms, cities, and ecosystems. In tightly packed fields, diseases can spread quickly, especially when many plants share similar genetic weaknesses. Growers respond with irrigation, pesticides, resistant varieties, greenhouse systems, and increasingly precise monitoring, but each solution adds cost and dependence on technology. The industry that once overcame seasonality now faces a problem that cannot be sealed inside a can or solved by a faster machine. Climate instability changes the conditions beneath the entire system. A variety bred for reliable yields may struggle when heat arrives earlier, rainfall becomes unpredictable, or a new pathogen reaches the field. The qualities that made modern tomato production efficient are now being tested by a world that is becoming less predictable. To protect the future of the crop, scientists began looking backward. Wild tomato relatives and old regional varieties carried traits that modern commercial lines had lost: tolerance to heat, resistance to disease, unusual root systems, stronger aromas, and the ability to survive with less water. Seed banks preserved many of these plants, while breeders crossed selected traits into new varieties designed for a harsher climate. The work was slow because every useful characteristic came with trade-offs. A tomato that resisted drought might be smaller. One with stronger flavor might bruise more easily. Another might survive disease but ripen unevenly. Now the industry needed that diversity again. The small, irregular fruits, once rejected by modern agriculture, were becoming a source of protection, reminding the world that the future of the tomato might depend on the genetic past it had almost abandoned. One answer has been to remove tomatoes from the uncertainty of open fields altogether. In greenhouses and hydroponic farms, growers can control temperature, water, nutrients, pests, and even the timing of harvest with far greater precision. Plants climb along carefully arranged supports while irrigation systems deliver measured amounts directly to their roots. This can reduce water waste, extend the growing season, and produce tomatoes close to major cities. But control comes at a price. Greenhouses require expensive structures, energy, skilled management, and constant monitoring. A failed cooling system, power interruption, or disease outbreak can spread rapidly through an enclosed crop. The technology solves some of the weaknesses of outdoor farming while creating new forms of dependence. Once again, the tomato becomes part of a system designed to protect it from nature, yet that protection only works as long as the machinery, energy, and capital supporting it continue to function. But controlled farming also changes who holds power. As production becomes more technical, control over tomatoes can shift away from farmers and toward the companies supplying seeds, equipment, fertilizers, software, and energy. A grower may own the greenhouse, but still depend on an entire network of products and services to keep it operating. This concentration of knowledge and capital mirrors the earlier rise of mechanical harvesting. Technology can solve a real problem while quietly deciding who remains competitive. The future tomato may use less water and survive greater heat, but it could also emerge from a system in which fewer people control the seeds, machines, and conditions required to grow it. Yet another future for the tomato was developing outside the most industrial systems. Seed savers, small farmers, chefs, and gardeners began restoring varieties that had nearly disappeared from commercial fields. At farmers' markets, tomatoes returned in shapes and colors that supermarkets had taught consumers to distrust: purple, yellow, green, ribbed, cracked, and uneven. Many were too soft for long-distance shipping, but when eaten close to where they were grown, they revealed the sweetness, acidity, and aroma that standardized varieties often lacked. This revival was not simply nostalgia. It challenged the assumption that every tomato had to survive the same journey or meet the same visual standard. However, local and heirloom production remained difficult to scale, and higher prices placed many of these tomatoes beyond the reach of poorer families. Recovering flavor was possible, but unless the wider food system changed, the best tomatoes risked becoming luxury products once again. Breeders began searching for a middle ground, fruit that could travel, resist disease, and produce reliable yields without sacrificing all of its flavor. Modern genetic analysis allowed researchers to identify compounds responsible for aroma and sweetness, then trace the genes connected to them. In theory, this made it possible to restore qualities lost during decades of commercial selection. In practice, every improvement still had to survive the demands of the market. A flavorful tomato that softened too quickly could be rejected by distributors. A disease-resistant variety that produced uneven fruit might struggle in supermarkets. Science could recover part of what had been lost, but it could not decide what the food system valued. As long as appearance, durability, and price remained more profitable than taste, even the most advanced breeding program would be forced to work within the same old limits. Those market standards also determined which tomatoes were considered valuable before they ever reached a kitchen. Fruit could be rejected for being too small, too large, unevenly colored, cracked, or unlikely to survive transport in perfect condition. Some of it entered processing plants, where damaged tomatoes could still become paste, juice, or sauce, but much of the crop lost value simply because it failed a visual test. Inside factories, skins, seeds, stems, and pulp accumulated beside the polished products prepared for sale. Researchers began finding uses for these remains in animal feed, fertilizers, oils, natural pigments, and food ingredients. Yet waste remained built into a system that demanded abundance and uniformity at the same time. The modern tomato industry had become extraordinarily efficient at turning acceptable fruit into profit. Retailers and consumers helped maintain those standards. Consumers had been trained to expect tomatoes that were available in every season, identical in size, free from blemishes, and cheap enough to buy without thinking about how they were produced. Retailers responded by demanding constant supply and rejecting anything that threatened the appearance of abundance. That expectation pushed growers to harvest early, use varieties bred for durability, and absorb losses when weather or cosmetic defects reduced the value of a crop. The system seemed convenient because its difficulties remained far from the supermarket aisle. Shoppers saw neat rows of red fruit, not the water required to grow them, the fuel used to transport them, or the labor needed to sort out every imperfect tomato. The industry had learned to deliver the illusion of endless summer. Maintaining that illusion required someone, somewhere, to carry the cost. Changing that system requires more than asking shoppers to choose a better tomato. Growers need prices that cover safer labor, responsible water use, and crops that may not look identical. Workers need enforceable rights rather than promises printed on packaging. Retailers must accept that quality cannot be reduced to color, firmness, and shelf life, while governments must prevent the lowest-cost producer from winning by shifting damage onto laborers and the environment. Certification programs, worker-led monitoring, shorter supply chains, and clearer country of origin rules can improve parts of the industry, but none of them remove the central conflict. Everyone wants tomatoes that are flavorful, ethical, available year-round, and inexpensive. Producing all four at once is extraordinarily difficult. The problem is not that humanity failed to improve the tomato. It is that every improvement was measured against a system that rarely counted the full cost. Each version solved one problem by creating another. That is why the future cannot be built around a single perfect variety or technology. It will require many kinds of tomatoes, grown in different systems for different purposes. Durable fruit for processing, regional varieties for local markets, climate-resistant lines for hotter regions, and crops bred with flavor rather than appearance alone. Diversity may be less convenient than uniformity, but convenience is exactly what made the system fragile. The tomato survived history because people kept changing it. Its next survival may depend on allowing it to remain different. Today, the tomato sits in nearly every part of the modern food system, from backyard gardens and street markets to industrial farms, factory lines, restaurants, and supermarket shelves. Its success is so complete that it has become almost invisible, treated as an ordinary ingredient rather than the result of centuries of migration, selection, labor, and conflict. Yet every tomato still carries the history of the choices made around it. Its size reflects generations of breeding. Its firmness reflects the demands of transport. Its price reflects negotiations across farms, factories, retailers, and workers. Its flavor reflects what the market decided was worth protecting. The fruit itself is not responsible for these compromises, but it reveals them with unusual clarity. Few foods show so clearly how human ingenuity can create abundance, while also hiding the costs required to maintain it. The story ends where it began, with a tomato turning a poor meal into something worth eating. That simple power helped the fruit cross oceans, enter factories, feed cities, and become the taste of some of the world's most familiar foods. But the same journey also changed what the tomato was expected to be. It had to grow faster, travel farther, look better, cost less, and survive systems that placed efficiency above nearly everything else. The tomato escaped poverty, but many of the people harvesting it never did. It escaped seasonality, but became dependent on machines, energy, and global supply chains. It became abundant, while flavor and diversity quietly disappeared. The next time you cut into a tomato, remember that its red skin hides more than seeds and juice. It carries a history of survival, invention, exploitation, and compromise, and a question about what we are still willing to sacrifice for cheap food.